I bought the ranch 3 years ago, 20 acres of hilly land that rolled into the edge of a growing subdivision. It wasn't a grand purchase, more like an act of defiance against the city. After 2 decades in construction, I'd had my fill of traffic, noise, and people telling me where to park or what color to paint my front door. The ranch was supposed to be peace, plain and simple. When I signed the deed, I didn't pay much attention to the neighboring homeowners association. They were a cluster of $500,000 houses built on land that used to be part of the ranch before it was subdivided. The seller told me they had some rights to access a shared parking area and a small utility easement that crossed a corner of my property. It seemed harmless enough at the time. I just wanted my space and a view of the hills. The trouble began the following spring. I'd just finished building a steel barn out back, one of those tall, modern ones with a workshop and a loft above it, when a letter arrived from the Lakeside Ridge HOA. It looked official, printed on heavy paper with gold-embossed lettering. The language was stiff and full of legal references. Apparently, my barn violated visual harmony with the adjacent community and was deemed non-compliant with HOA design standards. They were requesting I remove it within 30 days. I laughed at first. Then I read it again and realized they were serious. The letter was signed by their president, a man named Robert Langford, who, as I later learned, was something of a self-appointed sheriff in the subdivision. I drove down to their office, a glass-fronted trailer parked beside their gated entrance, and asked to speak with Langford. He came out wearing khakis and a white polo shirt embroidered with the HOA's logo, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, already sounding annoyed. "Yeah," I said. "I got your letter about my barn." He nodded. "Right. It's non-compliant with the neighborhood aesthetic standards." "Neighborhood aesthetic?" I repeated. "This is my ranch, not your neighborhood." He smiled. That tight, condescending kind of smile people use when they think they know more than you. "Technically, sir, your property is within the Lakeside Ridge development boundary. You may not have realized it, but our covenants extend into the ranch parcels that border the main subdivision. It's all in the zoning agreement." That didn't sound right, but he said it with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. "I'll look into that," I said, turning back toward my truck. Over the next week, I dug through every scrap of paperwork from the purchase. My property lawyer, a quiet man named Joe Michaels, found the key detail first. The HOA's jurisdiction ended exactly at the boundary fence, 120 feet short of my barn. My land was private, unincorporated, and free of any HOA restrictions. Joe helped me draft a letter to that effect, citing the exact survey coordinates and referencing the county plat map. I sent it by certified mail just to make it formal. A week later, I came home to find 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies parked in my driveway. Langford stood behind them, arms crossed. "Mr. Hayes?" one deputy asked. "We've had a complaint of unauthorized construction within a regulated community." I showed them the deed, the plat map, and the letter from my lawyer. It took 15 minutes, but they eventually agreed. The HOA had no legal authority on my property. Langford's face turned red. "This isn't over," he said. "I sure hope not," I told him. "I'm starting to enjoy it." That should have been the end of it. But people like Langford don't quit easily. Over the next few months, I started noticing cars parked just inside my fence line. HOA contractors, landscapers, trash trucks, even delivery vans were using a gravel patch on my land as overflow parking. They'd been doing it long before I moved in, assuming, I guess, that nobody would care. I didn't, at first. But when one of their trucks gouged ruts into my pasture after a rainstorm, I'd had enough. I put up a small sign that read, "Private property, no parking." The next morning, the sign was gone, so I installed a steel gate, heavy, welded, and locked. That afternoon, I got another letter from the HOA. This one accused me of obstructing community access to shared parking facilities and disrupting essential neighborhood functions. They gave me 72 hours to remove the gate or face legal escalation. I didn't respond. 3 days later, I woke up to shouting. A tow truck and a group of men in neon vests were parked at my gate. Langford was there again, arms flailing, yelling orders like he owned the place. "What's going on?" I shouted, walking down the hill. "Removing unauthorized obstructions," he barked back. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and called Joe. Within 10 minutes, he was on speaker, explaining to the deputy on scene that the HOA had no easement rights for parking, only a small underground utility corridor at the far corner of the property. The deputy told them to pack up and leave. Langford's face twisted with frustration. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset smear across the sky. The barn lights flicked on automatically, reflecting in the new gate's steel bars. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Then, 2 weeks later, I got an eviction notice. It was absurd, of course, legally meaningless, signed only by the HOA board. But it was stapled right to my front gate, and the message was clear. They wanted me gone. I didn't get angry. I got curious. Because something in their letter, a line about unpaid development fees for the shared parcel, made me wonder who actually owned the land their parking lot sat on. So, I went digging. And what I found, in the dusty corners of the county records office, was the first crack in their armor. The clerk at the county records office was a kind woman with silver hair and a dry sense of humor. I explained that I needed to check ownership history for a parcel listed as community parking on the Lakeside Ridge plat map. She rolled her chair over to a computer terminal and started searching. "Looks like this tract was part of a larger ranch property before it was subdivided," she said. "Here's something odd, though. It says the HOA never recorded a transfer of ownership for this specific section. It was leased from the developer 30 years ago for community use." "Leased?" I asked. "Uh-huh." She tapped the screen. "And the lease expired in 2019. The developer company was dissolved after that, which means it reverted to the parent parcel," I finished for her. She smiled. "Exactly. Whoever owns the parent parcel owns this too." I felt my pulse pick up. The parent parcel number matched mine. I called Joe from the parking lot. He was calm, as always, but I could hear a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "So, technically," I said, pacing beside my truck, "they've been using my land for parking for 3 years. "Technically," he said, "they've been trespassing." I asked what it would take to make it official. He told me we'd file a property boundary affidavit with the county and request a formal update to the GIS map. Once approved, that parking lot would legally belong to me, gate and all. It took 3 weeks. During that time, the HOA doubled down. They sent violation notices for imaginary infractions, blocked my mailbox once with their maintenance truck, and even filed a complaint with the county claiming I was operating a commercial property without a permit. Each time, Joe handled it with steady professionalism, firing back with statutes and documents that shut them down cold. The day the county approved my affidavit, I drove straight to the HOA's office. Langford was inside, sipping coffee and lecturing a woman about fence colors. He looked up when I entered, that smug look already forming. "You again," he said. "If you're here to argue about—" I dropped a folded document on his desk. "You might want to read this before you finish that sentence." He unfolded it. His eyes moved quickly over the page, then froze halfway down. "What is this?" he asked. "The new property record," I said. "Shows ownership of parcel C17, which you've been calling your parking lot." That's impossible," he stammered. "It's county certified," I said, "which means that parking lot is on my land, always has been." He started flipping pages, searching for a loophole, but I could see it sinking in. For years, they'd been maintaining, policing, and using land they didn't own. "This isn't over," he muttered again. "It's over," I said. "You just don't like the ending." I left without another word. 2 days later, the HOA board requested an urgent mediation meeting. Joe advised me to go, not because we owed them anything, but because it would look better on record. The meeting was held in their clubhouse, a sterile, over-air-conditioned building overlooking the very parking lot in question. 5 board members sat behind a long table like a tribunal, papers stacked in front of them. Langford sat in the middle, jaw tight. "Mr. Hayes," the vice president began, "we understand there's been some confusion regarding property boundaries." "No confusion," I said. "The county confirmed ownership. That lot's mine." Langford leaned forward. "Even if that's true, the HOA has invested considerable funds in maintaining that lot for community use. It would be unethical for you to restrict access." I smiled slightly. "Unethical isn't the same as illegal." He blinked. "You're not seriously planning to—" "I'm planning," I said, "to lease that parking area back to the HOA under a new agreement. Monthly, short-term, fair market rate." The room went still. Langford scoffed. "That's extortion." "No," Joe said calmly beside me. "It's a business arrangement. You can accept the new lease or stop using the property, but you can't keep trespassing." They recessed the meeting after that. I could see the panic behind their composure. They relied on that parking lot for community events, pool access, and deliveries. Without it, half their amenities were useless. That evening, I drafted the new lease myself. I set the rent at a figure twice what they'd paid the developer before, a fair adjustment for inflation and maintenance. It wasn't meant to gouge them, just to make a point. 2 weeks passed before they responded. A signed lease arrived in my mailbox, along with a terse note from Langford. "This arrangement is temporary and under protest." I smiled. For a few months, peace held. The rent payments came in regularly, and nobody bothered me. The barn stood untouched, the gate locked. I almost forgot how ugly things had been. Then came the letter that started it all again. This one wasn't from Langford. It came from the HOA's attorney, a sharp, aggressive type who specialized in community management law. He claimed my new gate blocked essential ingress for emergency vehicles serving the HOA pool area, which sat just beyond the parking lot. They wanted unrestricted access restored immediately, or they'd pursue injunctive relief. I called Joe again. He sighed before I finished reading it. "They're testing you," he said, "trying to push you back into court." "I'm not backing down," I said. "I didn't think you would," he replied. We drafted a counter letter that afternoon, including aerial maps, photographs, and the original plat documents. Everything showed the emergency access route ran within the HOA's own boundary, not across mine. I even went out with a surveyor and painted the correct line in bright orange. Still, they wouldn't let it go. One morning, I came down to find their landscapers had cut through the fence I'd built by the parking lot and parked their trucks right on my property again. That was it. I stood there watching them unload mulch and lawnmowers, and I realized something simple and cold. They'd never stop pushing until they ran out of space to push. So I decided to give them exactly that. Space. None of it. When I called Joe to tell him what they'd done, he didn't sound surprised. "They're hoping you'll overreact," he said. "They want to paint you as the unreasonable one. Don't give them that." I didn't. Instead, I took photographs, close-ups of the cut fence, the tire marks, even a discarded energy drink left by one of the landscapers. I logged everything by date and time, then sent the whole package to Joe. The next morning, we filed a trespass notice with the sheriff's office. Nothing dramatic, just paperwork and patience. Within 2 days, a deputy visited the HOA's office and issued a formal warning. Langford must have seen the patrol car pull up, because the very next afternoon, I found the breach hastily patched with zip ties and apology tape. For a week, things were quiet again. Then came the escalation. They parked a dumpster halfway across the property line, an old trick, testing boundaries without saying it aloud. Then they staged a community cleanup day, sending a crew of volunteers into the lot under the excuse of maintenance. I let it happen once. The next time I was waiting. When I heard the sound of engines outside, I walked down from the barn, camera in hand. Langford was there in his usual spotless khakis, pretending not to see me. "Robert," I called out, "you're on private property again." He smiled, that lawyerly smile. "We're performing community maintenance. On my land." He didn't flinch. "This area has always been for residents. You can't just take it away." I pointed toward the new sign ID posted, "Private property, leased use only." "Your lease payment was due last week," I said. "You're late." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't—" I nodded toward the trucks. "You're trespassing without an active agreement. Move them." He laughed under his breath. as if I were bluffing. "We'll see what the court says." And he walked away. Joe was livid when I told him. "Fine," he said. "Let's make it formal." Within 3 days, we served them a written notice of lease termination. The parking lot, as of that date, was closed to all HOA traffic. We gave them 48 hours to vacate their equipment and clear the area. They ignored it. So, at dawn on the 3rd morning, I drove down with my contractor friend, Dylan, and we started laying out steel posts across the access road. The sun was barely up when the first HOA residents came rolling down in their SUVs, coffee cups in hand. You could see the confusion ripple through the crowd. Langford arrived minutes later, pale and furious. "This is illegal!" he shouted. "No," I said, turning a wrench on the last bolt. "It's private." The barricade stood 10 feet tall, solid as a fortress. "You can't block emergency access," he barked. "Already verified," I said. "Fire chief signed off yesterday. Your emergency lane's 50 feet north. You've been using my land because it was convenient, not because you needed to." He didn't have a comeback for that. By midday, the entire HOA board had gathered by the barricade, arguing among themselves while a handful of residents filmed on their phones. I kept my distance, sitting on the tailgate of my truck. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Emails from unknown addresses, angry messages about how I was ruining the community and destroying property values. One even threatened to expose me online. I ignored them all. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. An older couple from the HOA came walking up the driveway. They introduced themselves as the Harrisons. They'd lived in Lakeside Ridge since it was built. "We just wanted to say," Mrs. Harrison said softly, "we understand why you did what you did. That board's been out of control for years." Her husband nodded. "They fine us for leaving trash cans out an hour late, but they never maintain the things we actually pay for. That parking lot's been falling apart for a decade. You did them a favor by taking responsibility." Their words took me off guard. I'd been so focused on the battle, I hadn't thought about the people caught in the middle. "We didn't want to fight," I said. "Just respect." Mrs. Harrison smiled sadly. "You won't get that from Langford, but maybe from the rest of us." That conversation stuck with me. I realized then that this wasn't just a property dispute, it was a power struggle. The HOA had been using that land to project control, not serve residents. So I came up with an idea. If they wanted access, they could have it, but on my terms. The next morning, I called a local paving company and ordered materials. Within days, the old gravel parking lot was transformed into a clean asphalt surface with numbered spaces and proper drainage. I even added lighting poles and a small sign at the entrance, Hayes Ranch Lot, managed access parking. The HOA board called it intimidation. The residents called it an improvement. When I sent the new lease proposal, I made it simple. Month to month, double the previous rate, with optional permits for individual residents if the HOA declined. They had a week to respond. Langford called me personally this time. His tone had shifted, still cold, but more measured. "You're making this very difficult for everyone," he said. "I'm making it fair," I told him. "You used my land for free. Now it's time to pay what it's worth." He hesitated. "And if we refuse?" "Then the gate stays locked," I said, "and your residents can apply directly." That hit him where it hurt. The HOA's authority depended on control. If homeowners started negotiating with me individually, the board's influence would collapse. There was silence on the line. Then, through gritted teeth, "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," I said, "but you might." He hung up. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, I looked out from my porch. The new blacktop gleamed below, freshly striped and empty. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. They'd tried to evict me from land I legally owned. They'd sent police, lawyers, and threats. But now, every time one of them parked a car, they'd know exactly who they were paying for the privilege. Still, part of me knew Langford wasn't done. People like him never were. I could feel another move coming, and I'd already decided. This time, I wouldn't just defend my ground. I'd make sure they couldn't touch it again. The next few weeks were a quiet kind of storm. The HOA didn't pay. They didn't respond to the lease renewal notice. They just stopped communicating altogether, hoping, I think, that ignoring me would make me back off. It didn't. Joe suggested we treat it like any other unpaid lease. We gave them a 10-day notice of default and scheduled a lien filing for their association assets if payment didn't arrive. It was all by the book, calm, lawful, deliberate. On the morning of the 10th day, I drove down to the parking lot. The gate was still locked, the asphalt clean, the lines freshly painted. A few residents had already come by asking about renting spaces directly, and I'd started drawing up individual contracts. When Langford finally showed up, his SUV rolled to a stop right in front of the gate. He didn't get out immediately. He just sat there, staring through the windshield. I stayed where I was, leaning on the fence post, arms crossed. Eventually, he stepped out. He looked different, tired, older somehow. "Do you really think this is going to end well for you?" he asked. "I'm not looking for an ending," I said. "Just closure." He exhaled sharply. "You're bleeding the community dry. You know that?" I nodded toward the lot. "That community has been parking on my land for free for 3 decades. You've been billing them for it, haven't you?" His jaw tensed. "That's what this is really about," I continued. "You built your budgets around something you didn't own. Now you're mad that someone noticed." He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. I took out a folder and handed it to him. Inside was the final notice, the lien filing paperwork, and the alternative lease agreement, the one that allowed the HOA to keep using the lot at twice the previous rate, or let individual residents lease directly at a discount. Langford flipped through the pages, then looked up. "You're dividing the community." "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you tried to evict me." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car. By the end of that week, the individual applications started pouring in. Residents were done waiting on the board. They didn't want their cars ticketed or towed. They wanted a place to park. So they came to me. By the 3rd week, half the homeowners in Lakeside Ridge were paying me directly. The HOA's revenue dropped so sharply they had to hold an emergency meeting to cover expenses. Word spread fast. 2 months later, a letter came. Not from Langford this time, but from the HOA's treasurer. It was polite, almost humble. They wanted to renegotiate the lease to ensure community stability. Joe and I reviewed the offer together. It was fair. Lower than I'd proposed, but still double what they used to pay. More importantly, it came with something new, a clause acknowledging that the HOA had no legal jurisdiction over Hayes Ranch or any part thereof. That was the sentence I'd been waiting for. We signed it. The next morning, I stood by the fence, looking out at the parking lot. The sun was rising, turning the new pavement gold. Cars were rolling in, people waving as they parked. Even Langford drove by, though he didn't stop. He didn't have to. His board was done fighting. It was over. Later that week, I took Joe out for dinner at a little steakhouse in town. Over coffee, he said, "You know, most people would have folded after that first notice. You handled it right." "I just didn't want to lose what I worked for," I said. He nodded. "That's how they get people, what intimidation, but the law is the law, and you own that land fair and square." I thought about that on the drive home. The night was clear, and the road ran dark between fields of dry grass. The kind of peace you can't buy, only earn. When I reached the gate, I got out and walked up the path to the barn. The lights glowed softly against the wood, the sound of crickets carrying through the air. Everything felt calm again, the way it was supposed to. But standing there, I realized something. This whole fight hadn't really been about land or money. It had been about control, about people who couldn't stand the idea of someone living by their own rules. The HOA had mistaken ownership for authority. They thought papers and rules could trump rights and work and sweat. Now they knew better. The irony was that I didn't need to block their parking lot anymore. The new agreement let them use it freely as long as they respected the boundary. I'd even had the gate repainted. Matte black, no chain, no lock. Just a simple sign. Private property, authorized access only. Some days I still saw Langford drive by. He never looked over, never waved. But once, just once, I caught a glimpse of him stepping out of his car near the clubhouse, talking to Mrs. Harrison. He seemed smaller than I remembered. Maybe he'd learned something from all this. Maybe not. As for me, I learned that silence can be the loudest statement. You don't always need to shout or fight. Sometimes all it takes is standing your ground long enough for the truth to settle in. That night, I walked down to the fence one last time. The sky was a deep indigo, the stars bright over the hills. I rested my hand on the metal gate and looked out over the dark, still lot below. Once they'd called it community property. Now it was simply mine.